As technology advances, so too do the issues and challenges associated with it. Cybercrime is becoming more and more prevalent globally, costing businesses and individuals billions each year.
I think the problem is user awareness. I think generally, and you see this in lots of industries, business will introduce technology to be aggressive in the marketplace, because obviously technology is a faster way to generally do things. People will start to use that technology, but they may not necessarily understand the risks associated with that. So I think the risks have generally been there, but because technology is now being used as an enabler, it's all out there, and people now can be targeted through those electronic means.
According to Interpol, in the past, cybercrime was committed mainly by individuals or small groups. Today we are seeing criminal organizations working with criminally minded technology professionals to commit cybercrime, often to fund other illegal activities. So how can companies and individuals protect themselves from cybercrime?
Companies need to invest in people, process and technology. It's not just about technology. Very often, if users are properly trained and aware of the security risks associated with the environment, they would be better prepared to detect a potential, let's call it a phishing attack that might come their way. If they're aware, even if they responded to the phishing attack and perhaps gave the username and password or introduced malware into the environment, if they thought about it and thought maybe there is a risk associated with it, they could alert somebody and perhaps they could detect it earlier. So it's all around detection, that ability to detect, and then obviously once the breach happens, how do you respond to that? What procedures do you do? How do you engage with your customers? How do you recover your environment so you can carry on with business? We've seen with lots of industry-related attacks. Specifically, I'll use Sony as an example. The recent cyber attack against them, which resulted in ransomware being deployed, was the second or third time that they've been attacked and experienced some sort of breach in nature. The ability to respond was perhaps not as slick as it should have been, and the ability to detect was not quite where it is, and maybe that's because the mindset is on protect. And I think we kind of need to move away from the fact that it's not only about protection, it's about detection and response. And once we become at peace with the fact that we may experience a breach, we can be better prepared to detect and respond to that.
Cybercrime is often committed from outside the affected country.
If the crime is being committed within the country, then the legislation is available to try and go after the potential hacker or syndicate that's committed the crime. But it becomes more challenging, because how do you know who attacked you if you don't necessarily have the right detective controls in place? So you kind of got to start off and say, okay, either I know the person or I don't know the person, either through an IP address, which I can then trace back to a home, a business, some other organization, and I can go after them because without doubt, I can say the attack came from this person. But with cybercrime, it's a bit difficult. Very often the crime happens from outside the country, in which case you're reliant on the ability to engage with a foreign jurisdiction and their ability to go off and find that perpetrator, and then is there a treaty in place, extradition, so on and so forth. And that's where it proves difficult, is that most attacks, either you don't know where they come from or they come from outside the country, in which case it's a challenge.
Cybercrime is here to stay, so it's up to companies and people to invest in mitigating technologies.
I think it's very much a case of cybercrime is going to continually increase. It's a very profitable business. People are making money out of it. Generally, people are being enabled, and user awareness is always difficult to get right and to make sure that consumers are on top of it. I think ultimately, if you look at the past and you trend it, it's going to continue. It's going to become more difficult to manage, and I'm not sure that we're always going to get it right, that we're going to be able to protect. I think we need to start getting into that detect and respond to that. I'd like to think that we'll get better at it, but I think from a prognosis perspective, it's going to increase and it's going to be a challenge, and we need to be creative around the problem.
Hello and welcome to Investor Africa. I'm Dumisho Greater. The recent hacking of dating website Ashley Madison brought to light the need for business to ensure that they are adequately protected from cybercrime. Candace Sutherland, Business Development Consultant at SHA Specialist Underwriters, and in London, Professor Bassie van Solms, Director at the Centre for Cybersecurity at the University of Johannesburg, join us to discuss how businesses and individuals can utilize good cybersecurity practices. Bassie, let me start with you, coming to us from London there. Firstly, just to tell us exactly what do we mean by cybercrime and how big is the problem here on the African continent?
Well, that's a good question. If we go back to some international reports, in about 2013, a report by a big cybersecurity company in the world placed South Africa as such as third on the list with the number of cybercrime victims internationally, third only to Russia and China. So that puts South Africa very, very high on the list of cybercrime. And in general in Africa, it is seen that Africa is a hotbed for cybercrime because of many reasons. I think there are some lights at the end of the tunnel in terms of some developments in many of African countries, but at the moment Africa as such hasn't got a very good name in terms of cybercrime and in terms of victims and cybersecurity.
Bassie said third on the list. That is very worrying. So what is driving this?
So let's look at the definition of cybercrime. So cybercrime is defined as any criminal activity involving a computer or a network. Ask the ordinary man on the street and they'll say it's credit card fraud, but it's so much broader than that. It is any unauthorized access to, interference with, fraud and forgery of data. So the reason South Africa is such a target is because our legislation doesn't really have any ramifications for any person who commits cybercrime here. So POPI is looking at that. POPI will address that. POPI is the Protection of Personal Information Act. But it's going to take some time. You know, it was enacted in November 2013. We're now July 2015 and we're still waiting for a regulator to be appointed.
Regulation is key. Bassie, I know that you just put a paper forward from an AU perspective on ensuring that there are certain laws in place. Paint a picture for us. Where are we sitting when it comes to the regulatory perspective here?
Yes, I'm actually in London at a conference, as you mentioned, giving a paper on the African Union Convention on cybercrime, cybersecurity and protection of personal information related to some maturity model in which countries which has signed the convention can actually measure themselves or determine how far they have achieved a progress on the line or the route or the road of cybersecurity. It is a big problem still, as we said, and I think Africa's got a long way to go. The African Convention is a very good first step. It's not a perfect document, but at least it provides some effort from the African Union as an organization to provide some guidance which countries must follow. Now, of course, the big question is, and that was also asked to me at the conference, is what is the political will of the different governments in Africa to actually conform to and follow the advice of the convention? And that is, of course, an open question. I don't know. We must just keep on fighting and laying out the benefits of good cybercrime, because the economy of countries today and the economy of Africa as a whole is to a bigger extent dependent on our cybersecurity and a safe cyberspace. So it's to the benefit of countries and governments to ensure that this happens.
We need to ensure this happens. We need to make sure we've got the right policies in place. Broadband, that's a big issue.
Absolutely.
So how are we going to balance the two? How are we going to make sure that we've got good security when we still have broadband issues?
Yeah, I mean, Wi-Fi itself is an issue. Using a Wi-Fi network that is an untrusted network is very, very dangerous. And looking at an SME, they don't have the budget to have these massive IT infrastructures and antivirus and firewalls and all that sort of fancy technology. So, you know, an SME would use Dropbox as the entire server. So what do you do in that situation? The only solution for a company to actually make it through a cyber breach is to have a cyber insurance policy.
Bassie, what are you telling people at the convention there when it comes to some of these companies? How can they make themselves less vulnerable, especially the ones that don't have the budget to do so?
Well, I think the major aspect now, and that's becoming clear from all types of literature, is the the aspect of cybersecurity awareness. Many people, many small companies, as we've just now heard, are exposed, and many big companies. And it's basically proven that the best money at the moment, or from the best money a company can spend on cybersecurity, is on awareness, making internal employees aware of the risks of cybercrime, the risks of how they can be infected, how they can infect the company, the risks of downloading malicious software from apps, the risks of using your own device in the company environment. So all those aspects, and that's where I really hope that national governments in Africa start with a national cybersecurity awareness campaign from school level onwards, because school children and primary school children are using cyber-based, internet-based devices, and awareness. I've got no doubt about it. That's where we must start to tell people, because many people are just unaware that by opening an attachment to an email, an unsolicited attachment to an unsolicited email, they can infect the company system. So yes, we shouldn't look at technology only. Cybersecurity is a multidisciplinary aspect, from human side right through the technology, but not only the technology. Technology can't solve the problem.
That is such a tricky one, Basi, what you've mentioned, because you are able to go home, get your emails from them. You are being more efficient with your time. So this is something that corporates are going to have to try and manage.
Absolutely, and it's something that it really is impossible to manage. It's like, if somebody wants to get into your system, they will. And we saw that with the Ashley Madison hack, with them saying, our systems are impenetrable. And now they're being held to ransom. A $200 million company brought to their knees.
Basi, I'm sure maybe this is one that you may have been following. What have been the trends if a company does find themselves in a position where they are under threat, where somebody has been able to hack or threatening? Should they just give in, or what are the steps that need to be taken here?
Yes, I think if a company, and I'll just come back to this issue of insider threats, it is proven, and it's shown in all statistics, that the biggest types of attacks are still coming from insiders, and not necessarily malicious, but also because of unawareness, as we've seen. But many companies, unfortunately, are still under the impression that creating a cybersecurity environment is a technical problem, and specifically the University of Johannesburg is widely involved now, and I'm also in the UK working with the University of Oxford, their Global Centre for Cybersecurity. And our specific project is working on the accountability of members of boards of directors, to accept their accountability and their responsibility concerning cybersecurity. It is not anymore a technical issue, it is a board member's issue. And all over the world now, cybersecurity, secure cyberspace, cyber risks for the company is becoming and is growing into a board agenda member. The World Economic Forum has clearly stated that cyber risks is amongst the top risks internationally amongst all companies. So it's a top-down issue. There's no doubt about that. You cannot solve the cybersecurity problem by technology from the bottom up. You must start from the top down, leadership, policies, directions, procedures, from the board down through the management, through to the lowest worker, and everybody must create a culture. That's the big thing. You must be a culture of cybersecurity. Like in Africa, we have a culture of doing certain things, and cybersecurity must become that culture. And that's what companies and countries, and I hope amongst the African Union can achieve, to do that, because that's what we need.
I'm going to come back to the issue around the African Union with you, Basi, but he mentioned the fact that it's accountability at board level.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. You cannot blame a staff member for something they haven't been educated on. And it definitely is something. There was a post recently about a gentleman who cashed in his pension fund because he thought that he won the Coke Lotto, right? So that financially is now that entire family is financially destitute. And people were posting comments like, well, if you're going to be that stupid, then you must suffer. And how is that fair to say? You need to educate your children, educate your parents, educate your grandparents, and educate your employees data is your most expensive asset, and your employee is your most dangerous asset, actually.
Well, we're turning into a short break now, but when we come back, we'll have more insight into making use of cybersecurity measures, and do stay with us.